Hi, therapy issuers. Thank you for joining in on our conversation between licensed mental health professionals. This is not meant to substitute a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. Should you become triggered or begin experiencing a mental health crisis, please go to your nearest mental health hospital, emergency room, or dial 911 or 988. And always remember, we are human first and therapist second. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and subscribe to our YouTube channel using the handle @Crave Counseling. This is Therapy-ish. So welcome back for another episode of Therapy-ish. I have Dr. Marlon Johnson with us today. And today I want to talk with you guys around race, religion, and sexuality. But before we jump into that, I'm going to have Dr. Marlon Johnson introduce himself and let us know about his company, his organization, and the clientele that he serves and where he's located at.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on Therapy-ish. I am so excited to be here to connect with you all. So I'm Dr. Marlon Johnson, pronouns he, him. I am, my professional role is kind of twofold. Okay. So I am a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Texas, as well as in Tennessee, primarily here in the greater Austin area, but my practice is virtual. So I don't have a brick and mortar just yet. Stay tuned. But I tend to work with people throughout the Texas region under the entity of my practice, Johnson Counseling and Consulting. But I'm also a professor. I'm an assistant professor of counseling and counselor education at Seminary of the Southwest here in Austin. Huh. Yes. So
wait, where's that school
at? We get that all the time. So I like to tell everyone we are our small little Austin treasure just north of UT's campus. Huh. So yeah, so just north, most people know like Posse East. They know like Crown and Anchor, the pub. We are right in that area.
Okay. There's a college like that in Dallas. I forget the name of the college, but it's like right in the middle of the hood. All the black people know where the university is, but all of the students they don't look like the neighborhood that they're in. And the only reason we knew it was there was because like they built this golden chicken like right in the middle of Oak Cliff. And so the students would walk across the street and we was like, that's a college? Like we didn't realize that was there. Yeah. That's why I'm like, where is that at? Because I feel like it's the same type of setup where it's like in the middle of somewhere random and nobody knows you exist.
That tracks. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you teach what class again? I'm sorry.
So I teach several courses.
Okay.
So I teach our skills, our counseling skills course. I teach our assessment and testing course. I've regularly taught our culture and diversity course. Okay. And most recently, I got a chance to teach our human sexuality course, which is a new elective that we've gotten. Which of course is fun, right? Because, it's a seminary where we train priests on one side, but we also have this CACREP accredited mental health counseling program that we say is culturally inclusive and spiritually integrated, but you don't have to come with a faith identity to learn how to be a professional counselor.
This is true.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. What are your social media handles?
Yes. So on Twitter and Instagram, I am at Doc Johnson LPC.
DOC?
DOC.
Okay.
Johnson LPC.
Okay, perfect. All righty. Well, thank you for sharing that. So let's get into it. So share more with us on how sexuality and religion show up in Black families.
Yes. So I'll start off by saying, when we talk about religion, we also have to talk about spirituality. Because when we talk about spirituality, sexuality, and religion, they all are kind of interwoven with one another, especially in Black families, right? So when we talk about spirituality, we're talking about, everyone's journey and search for the sacred or for meaning making in their world. So whether you have a religious tradition or not, we all have a way of trying to make meaning of the lives that we're living, right? So whether that is through connecting to nature or whether it is trying to understand the deep questions of like how we got here or why we're offered the life that we live during the time that in the context that we're in, right? Like all of those pathways and seeking practices, that's spirituality.
Okay.
And then take it a step further, how we organize that search is often through pathways of religion, right? So there are laws, there are codes, there are traditions, there are practices that we do communally that help us to further understand and search for meaning making, right?
Okay.
And then sexuality is then that practice of how we connect our internal bodies, our understanding of ourselves and our experience to intimacy, to authenticity, to relationship, right? So all three of those things all play a part. But when we think about religion and spirituality and sexuality in the Black community, I have to talk about telling the story with our bodies, right? Like Black people have always been telling stories with their bodies.
Absolutely.
And we have, whether that is, us re-narrating the stories of how our ancestors have endured and have engaged pain and have found ways to experience joy, whether it is telling the story of our faith through movement, right? Like praise dancing, or, you see us hooping and hollering, shouting inside of the church.
This is true.
Or whether it is, finding a partner and telling the story of how we care about one another through like that intimate touch, right? Like I immediately think of like, video, NERE, right? I think of brown skin. I think of how we're talking about all these things, how we tell that story of love and intimacy through our bodies, right? So I think for Blackness and Black community members, we're really articulating sexuality and religion through our connection to like a higher power, through God, through Allah, however religious context that we have, and as well through like I love you, I connect with you, I vibe with you, through this like physical and somatic corporal experience.
It's definitely somatic and spiritual.
Yeah,
it's like walking in a space and saying, I feel you.
Yep.
I feel you, which is why I said, like, I feel like I knew that was you when I saw you a few weeks ago, and I couldn't tell. But okay, keep going. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Like there's something, and I should disclose as well. Like my practice is a lot of, you'll hear me talk about stories. I'm a narrative, counselor. I'm a narrative researcher. But I also love talking about somaticism and, relationships and relational cultural work. Okay. So for me, I think the way that even I've acquired wisdom in this practice of counseling is through the stories that people have told me, as well as through the way that I've experienced both sexuality and spirituality through my own body's story, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, that just seems to vibe and make sense for me especially when I'm working with my Black clients and talking about this story, and how their families talk about these stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can see how sexuality and religion shows up in our body. Again, epigenetics, the body keeps the score. Yes. I forget the term for it, but neural pathways, and just different ways that we connect without physically touching. Yep. And I think that that's a huge part as to why, like, we see each other when we walk into spaces and we don't have to say anything. We feel it, like we just know it. Exactly. And it's the same with religion and sexuality.
Yeah. Okay. Because some people, I think mirror neurons, I think is one of the terms that people
that's
use,
what I was looking for. Yes.
And it's funny because like that feels like a really modern term for like when, I grew up and hearing people say like, my spirit met you before I met you.
I done met you before.
Exactly.
You done been here before.
Yes, you done been here before. You look at the baby like, ooh, that baby
done been here before. That is our favorite line to something, especially like when we meet young adults that are like extremely secure, wisdom filled, and just very knowledgeable about like who they are as humans, how they show up in the world, and they can like articulate that and it not necessarily be an issue for them to do it. Like people feel it when I speak, you hear me. Exactly. It's almost like that. Yeah. Okay. I think that when we get into talking about like church, which of course leans into more so the next question, it's usually church and sexuality and how sex is described in church. And I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole, but there are so many stories around trauma within the Black church.
Absolutely.
But when you talk about like how do Black families actually start the conversation in their household when it comes to being Black and just sexuality in general?
Yeah, well, it's tricky, right? Because we learn very early on from our communities outside of the Black context that Black bodies are dangerous.
Absolutely.
And we want to keep, our young children safe. Like, we want them to know the realities of what it's like to navigate this world through a Black body.
Mm-hmm.
And that we oftentimes have to think so much more about how that body navigates through the world than primarily, specifically, our white counterparts.
Yeah.
And so we want to keep our kids safe, right? Like, we want them to know how people might be perceiving them. But then there's also that intercultural context, right? Because we'll also talk about, like, oh, your daughter, she's showing up. She got a little hip on her. You might need to talk to her about some things changing. Or, oh, look at my little man. Everybody going to fall in love with him.
Absolutely.
Because, he has hazel eyes or,
yeah.
All of these things that we start, talking about with our children. And like, we're already starting to articulate what role you're supposed to serve inside of the community. I have 3 nieces, and I'm constantly looking at them, and they're different ages, right? From, one just turned 3 to one that's about to turn 11. And I already hear the ways in which we're, conversing about their bodies, about how we're, telling, my oldest niece, like, be careful about how you show up to this party because, these little boys are around, it's a talk around the situation, but not talk directly about the situation.
That's what I've been waiting on, right?
Yes.
There. That's what I've been waiting on.
And it's funny. I'll tell this story because I think it articulates this point really well. My niece was going to a party. I think it was like a Super Bowl party. Yeah.
At 11?
Yeah.
Okay, that's neither. And I'm not mad at it. I just didn't realize 11-year-olds had Super Bowl parties, but I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it alone.
It was her friend's family that was having the party. Right?
I'm like, Super Bowl party at 11?
Right. But she so she moved away and she was going back to our hometown to like hang out with her friend, right? And my parents were like, if you're gonna go to a party, just be safe. And my niece was looking at them like,
what are you talking about?
Like, I trust these people, right? Like, I understand. I'm like, you're just growing up now, so just be safe. And when she got into the car, I said, it was just me and her, and I said, hey, your grandma and your grandpa are nervous because you're growing up and you look different. Your body is starting to change and people are noticing you differently. And I know that you're also experiencing feelings that you might not want to share with your uncle right now, but I know that your body is changing. I know that things are acting differently and people are going to offer you things like drugs or alcohol, and they may try to take advantage of your body in a way that doesn't feel safe. So if at any point in time you don't feel safe inside of your body, or you don't feel safe with the way that someone is talking to you or touching you or interacting with you, let me know, because people may not always have the best intentions towards you. And you may not want to do something and not know how to walk away from that situation. Absolutely. And a lot of times, that just isn't and even me saying it, right? Like, it's still not directly saying.
But it also still feels awkward because as a mom, as an aunt, as a woman figure, right? I'm just going, as a woman figure, when you're talking to an 11-year-old, you really don't know how to have the conversation because nobody had it with you.
Correct.
And then you also have someone who is the clergy, right? My uncle, who can use the best language to tell me, but he still has to tread water by his word choice because I am an 11-year-old girl.
Yes.
And for you, this ain't my child, but I'm going to say what needs to be said and I'm going to leave it alone.
Absolutely. Because the last thing I want to do is be cornered by the parents, right? And
Absolutely.
I think, Black therapists also sometimes have this moment where we're like, the parents might come in like, why did you tell my child, like, X, Y, and Z, how to express themselves, how to, experience their body. Like, I'm supposed to have that talk about the change. I'm supposed to have the talk about,
I try. I do not engage. There are some situations where it's like, hey, like, if you're okay with me having a conversation with your child, I will.
Yes.
I know that you guys may not have the best language, but if you're not comfortable with me, then I'll give you a script that would be easiest for you. Just because, this is my child. Yeah. I don't want you saying nothing to my child, right?
Sure.
So I get it. I 100% get it. I just think I always err on the side of caution because these ain't my kids.
Right.
and I'm also not like, as close to all of my nieces and nephews as I was when I lived back home. So I would just be like, is this a conversation? Like, me and my niece or me and my nephew, we not close like the other ones. Right. So it's some conversations that I just, as an auntie, don't feel comfortable having.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that's a good note to bring in here, right? Like, you have to check your comfort with having these conversations. Like, how do you even talk about your own sexuality within your own body to yourself?
Absolutely.
How do you talk about your faith identity and your faith experiences to yourself? And then how do you talk about it to your most intimate persons, right? So whether that is a partner or a good friend or even your parents, right? Like, how do y'all talk about these things?
Absolutely.
And assess how that conversation is going down, because that will also give you information on how you might talk about it to the next generation.
Yeah.
Because honestly, these kids they got it. They are talking about things that I never imagined that I would be talking about.
I think I'm going to add this little aside and then we'll go to the next question. So when it comes to religion and Black families and sexuality, I always feel like it shows up when we're kids, like you said, right? And usually what we see is families saying, he a little sweet.
Yep.
He look like he look some, your baby seem a little different.
Yeah.
And everybody in the family be like, we knew you was gay before you came out.
Correct.
And it's just like, but why did you make me feel that way?
Yes.
Because what happens is we know they're a little sweet. And then it's just like when they get like maybe, and this is usually when you're like 4, 5, 6.
Right.
We know you're gay before you know you're gay. Or that you're different before you know that you're different. And just, I want to make sure I'm using the correct language. I'm just using it because that's the words that come out in Black families, right?
That's the language. That's the language we inherit.
And so then it goes from that when you're like 4, 5, and 6 to like you're 12, 13, 14, and your family's like, we finna go to church.
Right.
We finna go to church. We gonna pray about it. And in some cultures, even exorcism is something that's practiced.
Yes.
And so it's just like in our families, they're a little sweet. They got some sugar in their tank. They're a little different, whatever, right? And then when they get a certain age, it's like, now we're going to shame you for being who we already know you are.
Yes, yes.
And we're going to do that through religion. So that goes into the next question.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on religion being used as a form of abuse when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to Black families?
Yes. So, it's so fascinating to me because the line of thought that you're picking up on, there's a piece of it too that I think is often overlooked. And I think about my women and non-binary and trans femme individuals who maybe were welcomed and accepted, but like they weren't able to express their queer femininity or if they were women who also were experiencing those feelings.
Right.
It was even more difficult to explore and express because like, oh yeah, of course, like girls just hang out.
Right.
Girls just, y'all sleep in the same bed. Like that's normal.
That's normal.
Right.
That is normal.
But then to experience some of those queer feelings, right? It feels even more under discussed. So I want to bring that up too. Absolutely. As I talk about spiritual abuse and religious abuse, or religion as a coercive tool. Now, hear me clearly, right? Like religion has an opportunity to help people to explore questions and to understand the lived experience that we're going through. And there are ways in which culturally or even acts of white supremacy that we don't realize are a part of our religious practices.
Oh, Southern Black Baptist churches.
That impact the ways in which we help our children or help ourselves to experience and explore our gender identity, our gender expression, our sexuality, all of these things that are very natural and very nuanced in our way of understanding the divine within us, right?
Absolutely.
And so when we talk about religious and spiritual abuse, oftentimes it's the experience of someone who is in a place of power within a religious community or spiritual community
or household,
right? I love that you said that, right? So who dictates the rules and articulates that resources that you at one point in time had access to are going to
Mhm.
go away
Absolutely.
because you are choosing not to follow the rules, the regulations, the structures that we've put into place here.
Absolutely.
You are doing something that is an aberration to what we said that we are all connected to, that pulls you away from being that divine spiritual being that we are trying to shape and form you to be.
Right.
Rather than doing the thing that I believe religion offers us, which is allowing us access to see the ways in which the human that we are connects to the divine that has created us on this earth in this context.
Right.
And so I think a lot of times, I want to be careful because I know that like all Black families are not the same.
They're
right?
not.
There's a wonderful book by George M. Johnson called All Boys Aren't Blue, where he talks about.
I think I recently came across that book.
It's such a
I haven't gotten it or read it just yet, but I saw it.
Yeah, hot recommendation. If you want to talk about like Black queer life growing up. Great recommendation. Because he talks about this idea of, growing up and being in these spaces and being, seen as, a little soft or a little different, and being able to have family members that stood by him and said like, okay, so we know like Aunt so-and-so is going to say something and want to pull George to be a particular way. Or even George saying
in
like,
this environment, this is how you behave.
Yes. And
this
even
is
him
how
having
you
a
dress.
cousin. Yes. A cousin who was like transitioning. And, George is apologizing, saying like, I saw something in you that was so divine that I couldn't even handle it in my own body because it pulled me to see something about my own queer identity that I wasn't ready to handle.
I wasn't ready to face it.
And I think a lot of us, when we're experiencing or when we observe spiritual abuse happening, it's like, oh my gosh, this child or this adult is experiencing some type of liberatory freedom that I can't harness within my own self.
Or sometimes it's not that, it's a fear. It's a fear basis, right? Like I think when I was a kid, it was being taught that like if you hang with people who are different, you will become it. Yes. And so it was like, but you got kids running, I don't want to be gay, or I don't want to be different. And it's just like, where you get that from?
Right.
And it was the adults, or it was the pastors or the preachers. They say if you think it, you did it.
Yep.
And so if you're hanging with someone, the belief is that your ideals, your beliefs, your thoughts, your patterns are equivalent to the people that's in the same circle as you. And it's not true.
Yes.
It's not true.
Yes.
I had a classmate in middle school and he showed up as a male.
Okay.
Every day.
Yeah.
But the minute he crossed over into the school building, he had all his stuff in his bag.
Yes.
And flipped it.
Yes.
And when he left, he put all the stuff back in the bag, walked outside, very masculine to his parents' cars. And I just could not understand that because our family is very, very accepting, regardless whether you are a part of a community, not a part of a community, whether you behave a certain way or don't behave a certain way. It's like, you gonna do you regardless. Yes. So it's nothing that I can do to force you into something that you really don't want to do, except if I do that, I'm only gonna harm you.
Yes. And a lot of times those responses come out of that, like, I need to protect you to be as secure. And this isn't always the case. I'm not gonna justify abusive behavior, right? But I will say that there have been times I've had clients who are like, I'm so scared already of my Black child being Black. And now they're gay.
Yeah.
And I have to deal with that too.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to handle that. And I don't know how the world's going to handle that. So
Absolutely.
How in the world am I going to protect my baby?
Absolutely.
The one thing I know that I can protect them with is with the love and security of Jesus Christ, right?
Which goes into what you kind of touched on, but didn't dive into earlier when you mentioned how religion can be used as a harmful tool or tactic. That's where beatings come in.
Yes.
I'm going to beat it out of you.
Yes.
If I catch you with another one, I'm going to beat you again.
Right.
But again, it all, we're not going to jump into slavery, but that's the same religious tactic that was used then. So it goes back to it full circle to what you said earlier. Like we're taught this is how you should behave.
Yeah.
And it is only taught through religion that this is how you should behave, at least originally, right? Now it's like, oh, society doesn't. And it's just like, nah, originally it was religion doesn't.
Yes.
And now it's become a societal thing that says society doesn't.
Yes. Yes. It's so painful when you really start thinking about the ways in which our bodies have been, again, like I think you mentioned it earlier, that some of those epigenetic, those biological traumas that have been passed over time into us, of like the ways in which we teach you to like get along, or like to be in alignment with the ways in which that keep you safe, or that keep you on the straight and narrow path.
Right.
No pun intended.
Absolutely.
It's to like force you into doing this thing, whether that is you gonna sit on your knees and pray until, you know, or, you know, like you said, like we gonna have to beat this out of you, or like just these traumatic experiences that really pull people away from those explorations of their faith identity, whatever that faith identity exploration looks like for them.
Yeah. And I think a huge part in what you just said ties back into, I want you to behave this way because if not, I look bad, which again goes back to
respectability politics.
But I'm also even before then, slavery, Sunday's best. Why does Sunday's best even exist?
Yeah.
And it started there, and then it went to, well, you have to behave, act, be a certain way because. Now, I don't know if there's research on this because it just came to my mind, but like sexuality during slavery, like I don't know if you were not as masculine, if you weren't as valuable as one that was.
Sure.
I'm curious.
So there's a book that I'm starting to read through. I wish I remember the author's name. I feel like I'm super nerdy. I'm just telling you all these books called The Prophets. And it's actually a love story of two Black male slaves. And I guess there's some other characters as well you know, there are Black women who like are also enslaved and things like that.
Got it.
And you get a chance to kind of see that these men are, the community kind of knows that they're together.
Yeah.
And they also have responsibilities, right? To like, you still need to like, you know, create more enslaved persons, right?
Absolutely.
Like you still need to do your thing because
you still have to be a factory.
Yes.
Yeah, you still have to be a factory.
Yes. But again, it's this weird thing where inside the slave community, there is a way in which they're able to interact and engage with one another that like, it's kind of like, yeah, they're different, but like, you know, that's just them. Right.
We know.
That same eye roll that we still do today, right? But outside
same like
of that,
coworkers, that's not.
Hello.
We know. Yes. We know who work husband and her work wife is up in here. We know who playing games behind the curtains.
Yes. So I think there is some, I haven't done a lot of research in it, but I think there are this historical fiction feels like there's been too much work done because it feels so accurate.
Okay.
You know? So yeah, I think that's, if someone hasn't done it, I think that's something to explore.
Yeah. You know it was just a thought that came up. I was like, I wonder if that's where, because there's going to be a question we're going to get to, but I wonder if that is where the original space of, because we know about bucking, we know about some of those things, but in my mind, I'm just like, I wonder if that plays a role as to, you know, undercover brothers and women who don't feel comfortable being true to themselves.
Absolutely.
So, okay. How can families support their children or themselves and still maintain their faith?
Yes. Well, children are learning so much more language about gender identity and gender expression nowadays, which I think is beautiful, right? Like we've had different ways to kind of talk about like, you know, different expressions, whether, you know, we might look at our boys and say like, oh yeah, like, you know, he a little preacher, or, you know, oh, I was told all the time, like, oh my gosh, you're so articulate. Like, oh my goodness, you know, you're going to be a little doctor, lawyer, preacher, teacher. The four professions.
Absolutely.
Or, you know, oh my gosh, you would make a really great musician.
I
you're
can see
going to do
that.
great in the praise team, right?
I could see that. I could see that. I can 100% see that.
Yep.
See that in your spirit.
Yep. 1,000. And so there are opportunities now to not just talk about a particular child's role in that faith context that I think, they're observing through things like, YouTube or TikTok or, Instagram, and that I think we get a chance to watch with our kids and have conversations about like, what is this experience that you're like observing? Like, what do you think this means? That someone is, this boy's playing around with makeup, or like this girl is like holding hands down the hallway with her, her girlfriend. Like, it feels really scary to talk about. Cause again, a lot of us didn't have that language when we were growing up.
Here's my I guess statement
Sure.
to that, right? Kids are gonna kids.
Kids gonna kid.
They're going to be exposed to things that we weren't exposed to as kids, right?
Definitely.
And so yes, there is new language. Yes, there is content that's out. Yes, there are more conversations around it in the education setting. I remember having a conversation with a friend, and I always say this. It's not about your choice.
Yeah.
It's about exposure, right?
Sure.
For some families.
Yeah.
And so in my mindset, what bothers me now about children's shows is sex, period.
Sure. Yeah.
Being shown. Like,
I can see that, yeah.
I don't care what type it is. I don't care, because hear me out.
I'm listening.
Think about when we were kids and what was it? Love and Basketball might have been the movie that we probably were younger kids. I'm not really familiar with how old I was, but
you were young.
That or The Wood. It was one of the two, right? So but you distinctly remember the two scenes that I'm talking about, right? The one thing that I vividly remember, my parents and family, I think we were in Sherman at my cousin's house and her dad's side. And they was like putting their hands over our eyes.
Definitely. Yeah.
That's not something that we have the ability to do now. So it's, again, it's not necessarily about your choice to engage.
Sure.
It's a matter of how can I support my child?
Sure.
Protect them at the same time.
Definitely.
But also figure out age-appropriate content.
Yes.
Because you mentioned YouTube, Instagram, and some of the other things, but we're also seeing it in where sex is being taught, just the topic itself, regardless of the type. Cartoons, daycare centers, school centers. Sure. All the things. So it's just like when you get into that question itself, how do you still maintain faith, still love your child, and still maintain your faith at the same time?
So here's what I think I would do first. I think it would be really important for you to think about what sex means from your faith context and your spirituality context.
Okay.
And then think about like how would you have wanted to be explained what sex means from the particular frame of reference that you come from, right? So that can be dangerous, right? Like it can
I
be
just
challenging.
remember getting a book. It was like, here you go.
Was that enough?
I don't know, because I so I remember reading the book, I think. I remember reading. I remember seeing some images from the book, but I don't remember if I like thoroughly read the book.
Definitely.
But I want to say I had to be in elementary still. And because I remember the room. I remember when the book was handed to me.
Sure.
And I just don't remember what grade or what age I was.
Right. It was probably early, like 4th, 5th grade.
Yeah, because I think it was more so they talk about puberty, not necessarily sex.
And that's usually what happens.
Yeah. And so there was, I didn't start thinking about that part of life until I was like 17, 18, 19.
Really? Yeah.
Although it was exposed, right? Although it was exposed to me very much so like you, I was a nerd. Still to this day, I know I could play ball-headed games and be outside with my spare time and doing the things, right? Yeah. But I choose to read. I choose to do renovations around my house. I could do I could be toxic in it.
Correct.
Right. But it's not a choice.
Yes. I think there are opportunities because I remember I have a very distinct memory in my brain of 5th grade
Yeah,
where
around that time. Yeah,
where
yeah, yeah.
we pulled each other, like the boys went in one room and the girls went in another
Permission
room.
slip signed.
Permission slip signed, you know? And it was just about your body is changing.
Yeah.
I don't even think we used any other words to describe body parts. I don't think we talked about any of that.
But I still feel like that's appropriate.
Right.
But what is happening is kids are being exposed to other things, right?
Absolutely.
Other things, right?
Yeah.
Of course, we made mistakes.
Of course.
Because we weren't taught the other things.
Correct.
We were taught the puberty, but we weren't taught the other things.
Yeah. Like, oh yeah, you're going to start feeling things and you're going to want to act on those feelings.
But if you think about generations prior to us or prior to our parents, right? They were having kids at 12, 13, 14, 15. It was normal.
Yes.
So now it's like, what was the conversation like for y'all?
So there are all these conversations that just never happen intergenerationally. But going back to like the maintaining your faith while talking about sex and sexuality to your kids, I think it really is important to start back about what is it that your community, your faith talks about around sex and faith, and does that align with the way that you want your kid to explore and experience healthy sexuality? Right. Like how do you define healthy sexuality? How do you define
some
like,
would say the same as mine.
Right,
and that's it, that's all.
That's true. But then I'm gonna ask you, so what is yours? Like what is your context? Like what is sex to you?
And it's not sex. It's sometimes it's you should be with a man and he should be with woman.
Yeah. To honor God, right? Yeah. To honor the marriage that Christ has with the church.
Yes.
And I think if that's the reference point, then like this is the academic, right?
Now that I'm thinking, I feel like that is the reference point because it always goes back to religion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You should be with this, you should be with that. And because God said so and the pastor said so, and you're going to go to hell if you don't. Because remember, hell was used really heavily when we were kids.
And hell is a very coercive thing, you know.
Which we don't hear much now.
We don't hear as much. Yeah. Yeah, if you think about from the pulpit, you don't hear a lot of people utilizing hell as a mechanism to pull people to say like, nah, live right or you're going to burn, you know?
Absolutely.
Because we live in Texas, so it's going to be hot regardless.
It's going to be hot regardless. Okay, so why is sexuality so important in the Black community when it comes to being able to be self? Of course, it's a pivot from what you were talking about earlier about like you have to show up a certain way.
My gosh. Yeah, our bodies mean so much to us. Body autonomy, body security. You know, being able to express care and connection through our bodies matter. Being able to express our love of life, our zeal comes through an embodied experience. Not always, because I want to leave room for people who feel disconnected from their bodies, you know, whether that's through abuse or through trauma or whatever has caused that disconnection. I want to, be honest that happens for a lot of people too.
Absolutely.
But I think primarily when I think of, sexuality and sexual experiencing, it really is an opportunity for us to take that next level of intimacy and vulnerability with one another, and to say like, not only do I feel you and I see you, but like I get you.
We as Black people have mastered being okay with ourselves, right?
Yes.
That's what society thinks. That's what we think as a culture.
Yeah. And
wholeheartedly. But when it comes to sexuality, we have not developed that same level of confidence in self.
Yes.
So I can be confident in all other areas, aside from like being the only Black person working in a certain space, aside from the little small things. Well, they're big things, but
sure,
I'm going to use small things for the sake of this.
We'll take it.
We're confident in all areas except for when it comes to sexuality. Because even when teenage pregnancies happen, it's shameful. Even when people first experience sex and their family finds out, it's shameful.
Right.
Regardless of how you had it, right? Regardless of who you had it with, it's, they having sex now, so I got to go do this and I got to go do that. And it's just like, now we got to go take them to church and they got to confess their sins. If you're a Black Catholic, or if that's just how you do church or religion, right?
Right.
And so it's just like, we've mastered it, but have we?
But I even think to the point of like, let's say you did everything quote unquote right. where, you know, you were, you waited until marriage, you know, were waiting till that marital night, and you realize like, man, I just don't want to have sex right now, or I don't know what feels good for me, right? To explore that with your partner. And there's so much shame and guilt that comes into that play. And then now you don't have anyone to talk to, or everyone's like, yeah, girl, how was that? You know?
Well, sex, again, people still just don't talk about sex. Like, as much as we do in movies and shows and different things like that, there are still so many people who find shame in it. And again, I always say sex is for marriage, personal belief, right? Sex is for marriage, regardless of the marriage. Yeah. Because when you cross a threshold of something with someone, it is like the ultimate.
Yeah, a soul tie, right?
Basically.
Did you grow up with that language of like, you know, having sex as a soul tie?
Not necessarily. I think that has always been my belief in it. Now, I'm grown.
Yeah.
And I understand grown things happen. You know, I understand that. But I also understand that there's a reason you wait.
Yeah. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? I understand that. I ain't gonna use the word consequences, but when it comes to Black families, there are consequences to sex. You can get pregnant or you can get an STD. And this is all families, but specifically, that's what you're taught. It's like, we get a certain age, we don't really have conversations around sex. It's like, don't get pregnant, and don't come back with nothing.
Don't come back with nothing. And we don't talk about what that nothing is.
We don't talk about, well, how you even get there.
Correct. But don't go to that party and don't get pregnant and don't come back with nothing.
Yeah, don't come back with nothing.
So what if I kiss somebody, right? Like it's all of those conversations.
Yeah.
So I think what you're highlighting is that there are these missteps in our communication with people. And I think it's because there is a lot of, I don't know how to talk about this without feeling some type of like shame or nervousness or embarrassment. Yeah. Because if I say the words, then you might know too much.
Well, and in addition to that, again, it goes back to fear and shame.
Yeah.
Like those two emotions, fear. I'm afraid to be this person because, like you said, Black, queer, or Black man.
Yeah.
Who aligns with this? No.
Yeah.
But then, you know, for women, we're more accepted. Sad to say that, but it's the truth.
Yes.
Women can be bisexual and they can have the best of both worlds. Yeah. Men can't.
Right.
Not Black men, no way. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, so we down to the last 3 questions. And I know we like well over time, but we down to the last 3. Okay. So how does false identities or sexuality impact mental health for those who are trying to follow their faith and ideals, you know, when it's being discussed within the church?
Definitely. Well, you know, it's interesting because we hear a lot of scripture that talks about, you know, like, God just wants all of you, right? Like,
absolutely.
You know, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and he will lift you up. We hear all of these messages about like bringing all of who you are to the church, to the body of faith. But oftentimes like that might be dangerous because you might have a sexuality or spirit or a gender identity that doesn't align with how you present to that faith body, right?
You can be everything except this and here.
Yes.
Come as you are. You can be everything but this.
And I think that can create big challenges for people. Like you said, false identities, you know, I'm thinking about being on the down low. I'm thinking about, you know, like hiding your feelings with, you know, your girlfriend, like your girlfriend, but who you want to be your girlfriend. You know what I'm saying? I think all of these things pop up inside of faith-based spaces. And I think we get a chance now to start talking about like, what is it like that pulls people to feel like, you know, that being on the down low is the only way to talk about like sexual differences or different sexualities. We get to talk about now, you know, this pressure, if there is a pressure of Black masculinity or Black men to feel like they have to be straight, they have to present a particular way to be, you know, to be Black enough, to be like, to be a Black man, you have to, you know, be hypersexual, or to be a Black woman, you have to like be, you know, very like strong and like very feminine or very soft. Because I know some straight women who just don't present very femininely, and that's fine. That is beautiful.
Yeah. And of course, we all know a lot of that is we ain't got no choice.
Yes.
We ain't got no choice.
Yes.
Who we gonna feel safe with?
Who are we gonna feel safe with?
Yeah.
Yes.
And same for
we've
men.
seen that, right? Like the statistics will tell you, like the most vulnerable human on this earth is a Black woman.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is exploring false identities or different sexualities than what we may experience internally might be a part of that protective stance of we got to protect one another.
Absolutely.
And this is the best way that we know how to protect
Absolutely.
one another.
But I'm just thankful that we're now in a place where people don't have to hide as much.
Absolutely.
Because I think...
And that there can still be trust.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because there was a period like in the Black community where the only people who knew was the only people who knew, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And then, when that one person found out, it was like, oh, he down low.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, we don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
Because of course, women never have to be down low. We never have to be down low.
Sure.
There's for what?
Yeah.
For what?
Yeah. But men, there were massive ramifications to you being out.
And I always wonder, like, if that always stemmed back to the HIV/AIDS scare, that era.
Yes.
Like the false or the misconceptions of it and how it impacted that part. And then, of course, right now we're in a space where the language is around tearing down the Black household.
Definitely. Yes. So. Right. Which goes back to the Moynihan report in the 1960s. And we don't got enough time to get into it. Yeah. But let me tell you, there's a lot. There's a lot in the 60s and 70s.
Okay. So how can someone recover who may have been in a relationship with someone who had been battling sexuality while trying to follow societal or religious views?
I would say I would invite the person who is, kind of talking about the story of their partner that is, either transitioned or like is out, to remind them or to invite them that, that the other person is having, the new chapter to their story.
Absolutely.
And you are a part of that conversation. You are a part of them having that exploration, that experiencing. What they experienced with you might have been very real for them in that moment. That doesn't negate what y'all experienced together. They're on a journey that is separate from your own.
Yeah.
And I think it starts there to have that engaged conversation, because there's a lot of hurt.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of hurt. I think
because you did this to me.
Yes.
What's wrong with me? Why didn't you want me?
And there's nothing wrong with that other. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with you as the person that experienced that, collateral damage. I like that term. It's really intriguing to me. I like it a lot. You are a part of that person's story to understanding themselves more fully.
Yeah.
And that doesn't negate what y'all experienced together.
It doesn't negate that you're hurt. It doesn't negate that this was you feel whatever you feel, right? Yeah. It doesn't take away from that. So I will say, when I think about it, I think about the 4 agreements.
Ooh, okay. Yeah.
Be authentically you. Don't take anything personally. Be impeccable with your word. And what's the other one? You remember?
Don't ask me
okay, it's 4 of them, and they're good. So when you're the person, I'd just be like, here, take this book.
Right.
Read it.
Yeah.
This is the best way to explain how you can move forward, right? Still be impeccable with your word, even though that you feel like your trust was broken because someone chose to live a false identity.
For sure.
Also, it wasn't personal. Like, this person was trying to fit within societal norm. Although it feels that way.
It does feel that way.
Although this person was trying to fit within societal norm, it was personal for them to be forced into this.
Yeah.
Now, again, some will argue they didn't have to marry me, or they didn't have to. You're right. Sure. They didn't. But that's a battle that was personal to them. Right. And you just so happen to be there. Yeah. Because if it wasn't you, it would have been somebody else.
And I'll give this real quick system, and then we'll move to the next question. But we all have to remind ourselves that we are living in a sociological context.
Absolutely.
Like, just because what happens between me and you versus what I'm experiencing, what we're experiencing as a couple in the society of our community, in the greater society of like being Black, and what that sociologically, social culturally means for us. Like, that's a story that I'm experiencing and performing a role within that while I'm performing a role with you as my partner.
Absolutely.
And so
Fluid.
That's the
Fluid.
that's
Fluid.
Yeah.
We're fluid. Like in this moment, I'm experiencing you.
Yeah.
I won't get to experience you tomorrow.
Yep.
But I may experience you 5 or 6 down the line, 5 or 6 years down the line in a different capacity.
Absolutely.
And it's the same with relationships. Like right now, I might would have gone into a marriage thinking I would never divorce you.
Yes.
But then as we grow and we change and we're fluid, right? This happens. And of course I use that term loosely because some people feel a type of way about the term, like gender fluidity and, you know, the things. So I'm using that in retrospect to like change. Change is constant.
Yes. Relationships are dynamic. That's what I always say.
Absolutely. Okay, so what can we do in our community to be more accepting? Some may not like the question. Some may feel some type of way about the question.
No, absolutely.
But what can we do to be more accepting? And then we always hear that's how you get hurt, by playing both sides when you could have been honest, knowing that, you know, they would experience setbacks.
Yes. I think we have to ask ourselves the hard question of, do we want to continue to find space for people who are like us and not like us, who share the same skin, heritage, culture, community as us? Because we can't. When I do group work, I always start off groups with saying, I can't blame you for the misinformation that you bring into the room, but once I know something differently, I have to hold you responsible to the change of information that I have. So I think in today's society, we know too much about the pain that comes about when we don't have authentic conversations with people about, you know, about race, about gender, about sex, about class. It only does harm.
Right.
And I think living authentically means that we open ourselves up to just talking back and forth, just like kind of how we've been doing. Like we might not align perfectly on every single thing that we've talked about today, but I love hearing your perspective because it helps me to better understand how I'm experiencing my faith, how I'm experiencing my Blackness, my masculinity. And my hope is that it also helps you to better understand all of those things within yourself as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that curiosity does not have to fully change your stance about where you're coming from or how you feel about it, but that opens yourself up to at least being more welcoming and warm to the other person that's right next to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always say, like, we can agree to disagree, but I'm gonna still love you.
Yeah. Which can also be harmful, but for the most part, it can be. That's a listen. Well, I know we get short on time. I know we get short.
Now that I'm thinking about, in retrospect, but because I take nothing personally, it's not harmful for me. Yes. Because it's not harmful to me. Yes. Now, again, we can agree to disagree all day long. Right. But that doesn't mean that I gotta stop loving you immediately because we don't align.
Yeah. As long as you ask that next question of what does a loving relationship with me look like?
Because I've decided to agree and disagree and still love you. Yeah, absolutely. Right. But sometimes you don't have to have that conversation. Sometimes it's just, I'll set a boundary. I can love you from next door.
Yeah. But I might just not be able to talk about this.
Yeah. But I think a good start when it comes to like being accepting is knowing your faith. Yeah. Because if you say, oh, I'm Christian, or oh, I'm this, and they say love thy brother. But yet you're not. Are you? Yeah. I mean, you know, some might not like my statement, but it's true because I often have to ask myself certain things in certain instances as well. And even self, like there are some communities I'm not exposed to, and it's not because I don't want to be exposed to them. It's just not a part of where I'm at right now in life. Absolutely. And so that's my thought process. It's like, if you know not to take anything personally, I don't care what you do. Yeah. I don't care. Yep. But allow me to, if I want to live in a space, live in it. I'm going to allow you to live in yours. Let me live in mine. But do not force your religious beliefs on me, or do not force your ideals on me, we can have a conversation about it.
Definitely.
And we can leave it alone.
Yeah.
But my job is to protect my peace. Your job is to protect your peace,
Sure.
regardless of what that looks like.
Absolutely. Yes. It's a challenge, but if we
It's
want
hard.
relationship, it's required. We gotta have
and it's any relationship.
Any relationship.
And it could be over any topic.
Yes.
Any topic.
Yeah.
I just think that right now we're just in a hard space. Like we're exposed to too much.
We're exposed to a lot.
We don't sit in fellowship like we used to because we have social media. Everybody is a Twitter thug. and yes, you may not believe something, but this is where we at.
Yeah.
And so it's a dog eat dog world. Either you gonna get ate up or you not.
Right.
And in doing that, you just have to accept certain things. And if that's not your cup of tea, stay away from it. Stay away from it.
Yeah.
And if it is, engage.
Yeah.
If you're curious, engage. Yeah. If you get curious
ready,
and you don't like it, you just go back.
It's all information. Yeah. I always tell people, again, narrative perspective, right? The social network and the connection is all information.
Yeah.
To figure out how you're telling your story next.
I think right now everything is just so passionate because we talk about exposure in kids. Yeah. And it's like, what is protection for kids? But then you also go back and look at history and be like, okay, well, we don't want our kids exposed to this. Fair, whatever. But you exposed your child to someone in a church that had been molesting them for years and you swept it under the rug. I'm gonna leave that alone. But it's like, okay, again, I understand you don't want your kid exposed to this. Yeah. Rightfully so. You have a right. You have whatever based on your beliefs. Because religiously speaking, you're supposed to follow and believe whatever you believe.
Definitely.
And then
But when you're
talking about being in a church,
yeah,
and the experience in the church and the exposure within the church,
and the
it's like
that has happened.
The conversations are equivalent.
Yeah. So if we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about exposure,
talk about all of it.
Be honest about the exposure and abuse that happens everywhere.
Yeah.
So.
We just in this cancel culture and people losing their jobs. So you just got to be very careful about the word choice, the language you use, and what you're doing. You can still say, I don't feel comfortable with that. Or you can still say, this is who I am. You may not be comfortable with it, but hey, this is where we at.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, okay. So tell us where you at again. Tell us your social media handles.
So you can find me at Johnson Counseling and Consulting. My website is M as in Marlon, JohnsonCC.com. Or you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at DOC Johnson LPC.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank y'all.
Of course.
Thank you. I appreciate you for coming. So.